The second reason that Isaiah gave as to why Israel would reject the suffering servant as the Messiah was because his professional resume would be antithetical to what they expected of the conquering and triumphant Messiah. You see, the Jews expected the Messiah to come from a religious and influential family. They expected him to come from Jerusalem. They expected him to have the best education and from the best rabbinical school at the time. To be honest with you, they expected the Messiah to be someone like Paul before his conversion. Look at Philippians chapter 3, verse 5. This is Paul. You want to know Paul's background? Here it is. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old, just as Moses prescribes. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, where the first king came from. A real Hebrew, if there ever was one. How many of you know Jerusalem is located in the land allotted to the tribe of Benjamin? Does everyone know that? Yeah, even though it's part of Judah, it wasn't. Jerusalem wasn't in the land that's allotted to the tribe of Judah. It's in Benjamin. That's why he's bringing that out. Jerusalem's in Benjamin. Anyways, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest observance to the Jewish law. I was so zealous, I harshly persecuted the church, and as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. Now, be honest with you, that's not so impressive. Probably the most impressive part is that he's from the tribe of Benjamin, which means that probably his descendants were from Jerusalem. And not only that, he was a Pharisee. And Pharisees were well respected at the time of Jesus. We don't think much about them because of what Jesus said, but you need to understand something. Paul was a Pharisee. And believe it or not, many Pharisees believed in Jesus. Anyways, look at Acts chapter 22, verse number 3. Because that might not be so impressive of all, but this is. Notice what Paul said. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia. Why would he be there? Because the dispersion hasn't taken place. The reason his family was there is because they were merchants and very wealthy. But notice what else he says. And I was brought up and educated here in Jerusalem under Gamaliel. Ooh. As his student, I was carefully trained in our Jewish laws and customs. I became very zealous to honor God in everything I did, just like all of you today. So he was born in Tarsus, but he grew up and he was educated in Jerusalem. In fact, he studied under Gamaliel. Now, that might not mean anything to you, but you need to understand something. Gamaliel was the son of Simeon ben Hillel and the grandson of the famous and great Rabbi Hillel the Elder. People, the three most prominent rabbis of all time was Hillel the elder, Simeon ben Hillel, his son, and Gamaliel, his grandson. And that's who Paul studied under. Paul was going places until Jesus got a hold of it. Now, people, this is the type of person they expected the Messiah to be. Instead, Isaiah said he would grow up as a root out of dry or parched ground. Look at verse 2 again in Isaiah 53. For he grew up before him as a tender plant, a sucker branch. Something that most people think needs to just be broken off and discarded. And as a root out of dry ground. Now, according to John Mackay, a root out of dry ground was an agrarian figure of speech that was common in Christ's day. In other words, it was a figure of speech that farmers used. How many of you grown up on a farm, or maybe your dad did or your mother did? Do you know those farmers' figures of speech? I'll never forget one. a person went to the sale barn, and I can't say the names because everyone knows them. And he had a son with him. And he saw one of the farmers that he knew, and he walked up, and they started talking. He said, well, who's this by? He said, well, this is my son. And then he introduced him. And the farmer, without thinking, looked at him and said, well, he sure wintered well. Now, I can tell you guys aren't farmers. You never raised cattle. Because if you did, you know what wintered well means. See, when you have calves in the early spring, they're going to go through the spring, summer, fall, but they're going to go through the winter. And what you're hoping is they put on a lot of weight. And then by the time the next spring rolls around and it's a year old, if they've wintered well, they're big. They put on a lot of weight. So that farmer took a look at his son and said, he sure wintered well. Now, farmers, if you tell me I've wintered well, I'm upset. But I want you to understand, farmers had these expressions in Isaiah because it's an agrarian population. Everyone seems to be a farmer. Very few people are actually merchants. As a result of this is a very common figure of speech. And it conveyed the idea of an undistinguished start in unpromising circumstances.